No. We're doing a good game today. Just start the show.
Heads up, this episode marks the finale of a little mini-series I've been building up to since my Mystic Heroes episode. You don't need to watch any of them to enjoy this video, but if you're interested, I'm going to leave the 3 other videos in the mini-series in order from left to right on screen for a second or two. And with that, we move on. Let me tell you all about Level 5. I fucking love you. I want to be with you and make believe with you and live in harmony, but tell Square Enix you want to make another Dragon Quest game. Way back in 1998, when a 6-year-old GC was crapping his baby pants at the Forest Temple and tweens the world over were waiting to get old enough to talk about how great the 90s were, and by the way, they weren't, a demigod with beautiful hair and a heart-stopping smile named Akihiro Hino, along with similar half-deities of assorted pantheons, left the software company River Hill Soft in order to work on 3D software and founded Level 5, an independent developer with 11 employees in October of that year. Credentials: bang, bang, boom! Ding, ding! Gracias Padre Santo para el juego que voy a jugar en un poco, amen. But we're not talking about that stuff right now. You see, Level 5 is one of the most successful developers in Japan, and have managed to do it all the while remaining an independent one. And it all started with Dark Cloud. By today's standards, and I'm sure the standards at the time, the narrative of the game starts off like a generic JRPG. 1. A slightly less evil character summons a greater evil character to do their bidding. 1A. Twerking is involved. 2. Greater evil character displays its power by destroying and conquering the world. 3. Main character is young impressionable child saved from destruction by wise old man. 4. Wise old man bestows child with world-saving power and sends them off on adventure. But there's a catch this time. The Great Fairy King, and yes, that is his name, has sealed away all the people in the world and their belongings inside of magical spheres called Atla, and scattered them across the land to divert the Dark Genie's attention. Gifting Toan with the power of Atla Milia, a gem that can absorb Atla and break its seals, he asks Toan to rebuild the cities of the world on his quest to stop the Dark Genie. I hope Toan brought his Atlas to find all those Atla. Get it? Because Atlas was the, he held the circle thing on his back. The reason I bring it up is because collecting Atla and rebuilding the towns is actually a fully controllable feature in the game, which I'll get to later. In one sentence, Dark Cloud is a dungeon-crawling, city-building action RPG. Now, I know that sounds bonkers, but what's really bonkers is that Dark Cloud manages to spread itself evenly across these 3 core genres and blends them together to make one very unique experience. The first thing the player gets exposed to is the dungeon-crawling aspect of the game, which at first, again, appears very generic. However, along with the usual inclusion of treasure chests and enemies, the dungeons also contain smaller elements that make exploring them much more engaging. It's difficult for me to choose which one of these added elements to start with because they almost all work perfectly together, so just give me a second to fully explain the relationship. On each randomly generated floor, players have the chance of running into small pools of water, on one occasion a pretty picture of water that heals the player's health and replenishes the character's thirst. A character's thirst decreases over time and whenever they take action. This could be either fighting enemies or moving around the dungeon. When thirst reaches 0, the player begins to take damage to their health. Luckily, there are plenty of items that recover health and quench thirst respectively, as well as plenty of items that cure status effects, and Dark Cloud effectively makes the status of your inventory very important. Water fountains are not guaranteed, neither is running into healing items, and being too careless in this game, simple as it is guaranteed to result in the KO of your current character. But it's not a game over, it's handover. Your money, that is. Despite there being 6 playable characters that you can switch through, if you happen to succumb to the pressures of the dungeon, you must leave it, and leave behind half of your total currency. The alternative is using an item called Stand-In Powder that allows you to switch to another character, or resetting your game and losing progress you've made since your last save. Ironically, to save your money, and whatever progress you had made on whatever floor you were kicked off of, you have to spend your money. The items that extend your lifespan in the dungeons have to be purchased before you enter, but with a limited inventory space and a lot of treasure chests to open, the question is, do you really need them? Theoretically, if a player was good enough, they wouldn't need healing items or water to survive the dungeon. This would free up the space needed for the more valuable treasure you can find during your exploration. Easy peasy, right? But that's without exploring the other half of the dungeon crawling. The combat. Part of the reason Dark Cloud is able to maintain its slightly easy difficulty from start to finish is because the playable characters don't have typical RPG stats of their own except for health and defense. The real RPG characters of this game are the weapons your characters use. Fitted with elemental attributes, typical parameters like attack and speed, bonuses against certain types of enemies, and filled with special attachments that can increase these stats, the weapons of Dark Cloud are the tools you use to leave dungeons sans monsters. But once again, being too careless in this game, simple as it is, can leave you sans weapons too. All weapons have their own HP bar that goes down whenever they hit an enemy. If the weapon's HP hits 0, then that weapon breaks and disappears forever, with the exception of every character's first weapon, which permanently loses all its improvements and is rendered virtually useless until you repair it. Weapons can be repaired and maintained with the use of repair powder, which can be bought from the in-game merchants. Repair powder is much cheaper to purchase than an entirely new weapon, and maintaining weapons is not only more cost-effective, but it's also the only way to make the strongest weapons in the game. The more a weapon is used, the more abs it gets, and once that weapon has a rock-hard 6-pack, it's able to be upgraded. Attachments equipped to an upgradable weapon add permanent improvements to that weapon's stats and dissolve in the upgrade, allowing for the attachment of more attachments. Weapons can be upgraded infinitely, but after the 5th time can be broken down into a synth sphere, which is a special attachment that you can attach to any other weapon that will give that new weapon 60% of the old weapon's stats. When a weapon meets certain criteria, it can then be built up into a new weapon. And as you attach attachments, you will begin to grow attached to the weapon you are attaching them to. All of a sudden, keeping that weapon maintained is as important as maintaining dungeon progression. The obvious response is to stockpile repair powder to avoid ever losing your precious giant fish pop. But between food for health and water for thirst, not to mention any items you pick up exploring, that inventory space is starting to get a little cramped. Luckily, no amount of repair powder can help you if you don't know how to fight enemies properly. Dark Cloud would be a proper shit show if enemies were as simple to kill as mashing the attack button, and it is that simple if you're a simpleton. Sure, you can mash away, but enemies have their own strengths and weaknesses, their own movesets, and most dangerous to you and your Aquarian hammer, they can block. Hitting an enemy that's blocking reduces a weapon's HP dramatically, and if you're swinging away without care, the reaction you'll have to losing hours of weapon building will be equally dramatic. Other enemies reduce weapon HP because of physical properties like being made of stone or lava. You don't have to change your strategy if you don't mind completely using your inventory of repair powder on a pair of golems or breaking your macho sword on an enemy shield, but you have 6 characters for a reason. Reason being to avoid unnecessarily wasting items. Dark Cloud has 3 ranged fighters and 3 melee fighters, all with different weapons and different ways of attacking enemies. If there's a golem in your way, Ruby the Genie's magic ring blast breaks through his bad magic defenses at only 1 HP per attack, as opposed to the 4 or 5 Toan's sword loses per swing. These kabuki masks block most ranged attacks and melee strikes, but Goro's charge attack lends him a few moments of invincibility he can use to counter its attacks, saving not just weapon HP, but Goro's HP as well. Each new enemy type you encounter brings with it a whole new puzzle to solve with the tools you have on hand. Each new floor of each new dungeon is a new set of puzzles, and is itself a much bigger puzzle to solve using the fewest items and in the most efficient way possible. And solving those puzzles is what makes Dark Cloud so engaging and therefore entertaining. But we haven't come full circle yet. Or should I say full sphere. Clearing dungeons in the most efficient way possible is a nifty thing, but not without any curveballs. More than 100 to be more specific. The Atla you must gather and collect in every dungeon are more than just a diversion from progressing in the game. They are the only way to progress in the game. The spheres of Atla you find contain little pieces of the world that you can restore if you leave the dungeon after collecting them, but with the added bonus of being able to put them down wherever in the provided space you want. You have absolute control over what every village looks like, down to the paving of the roads and the placement of bridges across rivers. Atla contain things as large as buildings, to people, to small accessories that belong to respective structures. Talking to the people you save provides further instruction on how to accurately rebuild their homes, and once you've completely rebuilt a structure, you unlock an event with the owner of that home. So what makes rebuilding the world so eventful? Why waste time building cities when you could be formulating dungeon strategies or buying items from a vendor? Well, where do you think those vendors come from? You bring them back, give them their stock, the tools they need to provide you with supplies. In fact, most of the buildings you help restore will provide you with utilities like storage space, or in many cases, key items you require to advance further into the dungeons. In this way, city building becomes an integral part of the gameplay, but it's more than just a feature. It's a reward. While the dungeon crawling action RPG aspect of Dark Cloud is the critical challenge, the literal world building is the creative vacation that lasts longer depending on how long you manage to remain in the dungeon and collect Atla. The more Atla you've collected, the more pieces you can set down on your return, and the better equipped you can be on your next dungeon run. For every floor you complete in a dungeon, little red boxes will spawn in its corresponding village, but most of these boxes will only be acquirable if you use the Atla you find. The more complete a house is, the more boxes that appear, and the more boxes that appear, the more free items you receive. But receiving a free item isn't as good as receiving an item that frees you from using them. Inside some of these little red boxes are items that increase a character's max HP, their max thirst, or their defense stat. Increasing these stats means having to use less items, and using less items means more inventory space and longer dungeon runs. But beyond that are the requests asked of you by the inhabitants to reform their town in a better way than it was before. Each person in every location has a special request that you can choose to fulfill or not, but fulfilling every special request earns a special reward. On one occasion, you gain a second charge attack for Toan. On every other occasion, you gain powerful weapons for your characters. This may not seem like a big deal, but now take a step back and look at all the work you've put into this area. This was an empty lot when you got here, but now it's an even better place to live in than it used to be. A fact you find hard to ignore when you're walking around picking up the stat upgrades and other rewards for making it happen. At first, you were just trying to get free stuff, but now you're trying to determine how to place every building in such a manner that you can build a road that connects them all and still satisfy every request. Now you're trying to exhaust every single tile piece you have to create your perfect vision. Now you're wondering which part of the game serves the other. Are you building the city to be a better dungeon runner, or are you running the dungeon to be a better city builder? It's in this way that the city building in Dark Cloud becomes as important and integral as everything else, just as engaging as everything else, by thinning the line between these two systems to something as small as pushing a button and blending them together as one cohesive entity. Am I exaggerating and hyperbolizing the experience the game provides? Obviously. Does this game have glaring issues that bog down that experience? Also yes. Muskalaka's request requirements are too specific and severely cut down on the creative freedom the rest of the villages allow. The other locations allowed multiple ways to satisfy the requests of the villagers, which means no two versions of the same village will be completely alike, but Muskalaka's request involves lining up houses with corresponding totem poles, resulting in fewer solutions and even less possible variety. I'm not usually one to tout the status quo, but in this case the added restriction harms the experience rather than enhances it. Dark Cloud is no shit show, but the story it's trying to tell is. Your characters get very little development and have little to no backstory of any significance and join your party just because. At one point, a mini-boss gives you a potion that turns your pet cat into a girl, and then she decides to help you on your quest. Because. There's a subplot involving Toan and his father, but it's only mentioned once and it doesn't go anywhere. The mini-boss from before disappears until the very end of the game so that he can kill himself, but he turns out to be the reason behind the Dark Genie's existence. But that's not the Dark Genie, that was just a rat that absorbed the Dark Genie's powers, and the real Dark Genie is just Sasuke in that stupid hand wing form thing. Coupled with a serviceable but oftentimes mediocre localization, you'll understand Dark Cloud's story after it's all over, but you won't be very impressed. Having 6 characters is appealing but redundant and staggering. The constant switching back and forth to take advantage of character-specific traits makes it very difficult to evenly upgrade weapons. You will likely pick a favorite melee and a favorite ranged character, upgrade their weapons exclusively, and then swap into other characters when specifically needed. The game could have benefited from having less party members and giving each one a melee and ranged attack, something they did in the sequel. The dungeons are also equipped with special blockades that can only be traversed by certain party members. Early on, this is just a way to prevent progression through the story without first acquiring a new party member, but later on, once you have everyone in your party, these blockades continue to show up in dungeons and serve only as time wasters, requiring you to switch to a different character just to cross it. A limited floor mechanic that forces you to only use a specific character on certain floors is a much better way of getting players to use the entire roster and is already in the game. Moments that could have been interesting boss fights are just quick time events, and the game completely wastes a cool looking mech that you put together yourself on a cutscene in which it blows up into pieces after doing virtually nothing. Fucking boo! Actual boss fights are completely one-dimensional and uninteresting. Each one has a gimmick, and once you figure it out, you can catch the boss in a loop for about 5 minutes straight before it dies. The worst of them all is the final boss fight against the Dark Genie. Not because it's one-dimensional, but because it's designed terribly. It's a 3-phase boss fight with a long, unskippable cutscene before it, but that's not all. Phase 2 of this boss has an unblockable attack, and the only strategies I could find against it involved using a rare dungeon item that lowered the damage or switching to the character with the most health and highest defense to just soak the hits. This is not formulating a strategy against a boss. This is running into a brick wall head first because the alternative is being slammed against it. And if you manage to make it past phase 2 with any health items left over, phase 3 of the boss is a complete disaster. You're placed inside a small room with no visible walls or floors, but all of the boss's moves are ground related and therefore difficult to gauge. If you miss the opportunity to strike at the weak point, the boss will employ a laser beam attack that traces the ground and follows you. If it hits you, it kills you because you're unable to outrun it in the short moments of invulnerability you have after being knocked over. If you do manage to outrun it, the room is so small and so difficult to maneuver in that you'll likely hit an invisible wall and be caught in the laser again anyway. And if you can manage to look past all of that, there are also 2 add-on enemies that will respawn indefinitely until the boss is killed. This entire boss fight is a disgusting infection on an otherwise wholesome game, and all of these things either waste time without reason or have no rational solution and are antithetical to the economizing challenge of the game. And I really think that's what makes Dark Cloud so interesting, the innate desire it pulls out of me to do something as best as I possibly can. That feeling I get when I completely clear a dungeon without ever having to leave it once because I was prepared and skilled enough to do so. The sense of accomplishment I have taking a victory lap around the village I've just finished carefully constructing. The excitement found in completely upgrading a weapon into its final form and the immediate sensation of wanting to test it out to celebrate my determination in acquiring it. Is it a difficult game or a game with depth? Not really, but it pulls you in all the same because it's fun and challenging in a personal way. If you're the sort of person that doesn't typically set their own goals when playing a video game, then Dark Cloud is going to be underwhelming because aside from finishing the game, it doesn't make any for you. What it does is allow your imagination to take hold of its many parts to create an experience that's very much your own. We don't see a lot of that kind of thing in video games nowadays. I appreciate it a lot more now than I did back then, and I wanted to make sure I got that appreciation across to you guys. So much so that I spent most of this episode not making a single Star Trek joke.
Most illogical.
This ran really long. I'm pretty sure most of you are late for something.
Mystic Heroes, Metropolis Mania, and Evolution Worlds shared one thing in common. They were lacking a sense of completeness. For me, playing Dark Cloud as a kid gave me the closure I couldn't get from the other 3, and it was the first time I had ever become a fan of a video game developer. Level 5 left an impression on me by providing a game that was a better version of 3 I had already played.
That level 5 logo showed up several more times as I was growing up, and I'm sad to say that there's still a few level 5 games that I haven't played, so expect a mini-series on those sometime in the future. Until next time guys, my name's GC, remember that you are amazing, I'll see you later.